Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast with Ollie Rock. Matt Samuels is Senior Product Counsel at Databricks. Before spending the last 5 years in-house at companies like Twitch and Databricks, Matt focused on IP litigation matters. He spent several years at big law firms as an associate and has also clerked for both a U.S. District Court in Los Angeles and also a U.S. Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. Our discussion highlights Matt's successful career moves and helps connect the dots backwards to trace his path to his current position. His passion is contagious, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. Hey, Matt, super excited to have you on the podcast.
Oh yeah, super happy to be here.
I'd love to start things off with an icebreaker. So the question is, if you could do any other career, what would it be and why?
Man, that is a good question. If I could answer what my teenage self would like to do, it would probably be a bass player. Join a band, travel with the band. I played music growing up. I still have a bass guitar that I'll jam around with, but definitely not technical enough to go and do that professionally.
Nice.
I want to do something a little bit more pragmatic, maybe consulting. I think my job in many ways is consulting adjacent, but it'd be cool to have more of a business eye view of what a bunch of different companies are up to.
Gotcha. That's awesome. Cool. And then second question, Matt, is what's your favorite thing about yourself?
My favorite thing about myself, I've got an awesome wife, so that's probably number one. And number two, I'm a pretty present person. I don't tend to future trip that much. I don't tend to dwell on the past that much. So yeah, pretty present, pretty good listener. And I think those are skill sets that suit an in-house attorney well, which we might get into.
Totally. Awesome. Cool. Well, let's jump into it. You have a really interesting career path where you actually started off in litigation, both at a law firm, and then you did some clerking, and then you transitioned in-house to Twitch, and then most recently Databricks. So I'm excited to get into that, but I'd love to take it back to the early days when you were at Berkeley studying biomedical engineering. Maybe you can talk about what your mindset was like. Were you thinking about going to law school, or what were you thinking about doing after graduating?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for context, I come from a family of a number of doctors and a number of lawyers. My dad is a lawyer. One of my uncles is a lawyer. One of my uncles is a doctor. And I actually grew up thinking I was going to be a doctor for almost all of my young life. Chose to study bioengineering because I thought that'd be an interesting way to see what new medical technologies are out there, but still keep an eye on the prize. And then when I was in college, I started talking to a number of folks who were either applying to med school, in med school, or had recently graduated, and I just became disillusioned with what it actually meant to be a doctor. I think I had rose-tinted glasses on and what the profession was like. I'd been in school, obviously, for 14, 15 years and didn't want to do another 8 or more years to try to get medical school, residencies effectively still being in school, maybe do a post-residency fellowship. And then also really just didn't enjoy the lab classes. And I thought, if I don't like this stuff, I might not like a lot of the parts of being a day-to-day medical practitioner. And this was probably around 2007, 2008 when I was figuring that out, and started thinking a bit more broadly about what I might want to do. Law really wasn't something that really clicked for me, even though I had lawyers in the family. I thought about consulting, like I mentioned earlier. I thought about being an engineer, but even though I was a biomedical engineer, I didn't see myself as wanting to do that for a profession.
So did your dad serve as inspiration at all?
He sort of did, but only after I kind of had the kernel of the idea that I might want to go to law school. And I took one class in particular at Cal where I was in an undergrad two classes, one in bioethics and one about innovation. And that's the first time I'd even heard about patents and, got the idea that, an engineer actually can be a very valuable lawyer to a company by protecting the company's IP. As I mentioned, I was a bio engineer. So I thought, hey, maybe I can think about going to law school. I'll look a little bit more into that and go into some sort of pharma company and help them out.
That's awesome. Yeah. So can I ask what kind of law does your dad practice?
He's a bankruptcy attorney. So to this day, it is still something I know very little about. I'm not my brain doesn't work in kind of the financial world the same way his or a corporate lawyer does. But yeah, he's lifetime bankruptcy lawyer. What's funny is my uncle is actually an IP litigator. So he's someone I reached out to when I kind of had this idea without really knowing what he did. And he's like, that's exactly what I do for a
That's
profession.
Yeah, that's so nice that you had some folks to lean on in your family and to get some inspiration. I'm going to be attending Berkeley, and no one in my family is a lawyer, so it's kind of interesting not knowing as much as what I'm getting myself into. But that's awesome, Matt. So can you talk about your journey to Stanford? Obviously, you went to the best school, if not the best school in the country. So what did your LSAT journey look like? How did the law school application process go?
Yeah, so I started studying for the LSAT in the summer leading up to my junior year. That's kind of when I at least was pretty seriously considering going to law school. I took a class at Cal during the summer as well, but spent a lot of the time just prepping for the LSAT. I took one of the courses. It was either Kaplan or Blueprint. I forget the names of them, but one of the pretty well-known LSAT courses. And my instructor was someone who had graduated or was about to graduate Cal, and he got a 180 on his LSAT. And he was going to Yale, super friendly guy. And he and I clicked, and I thought, oh, this is cool. If this guy wants to be a lawyer, this probably makes a lot of sense for me. So I took it. Coming from an engineering background and someone who played a lot of Sudokus during class, I never once missed a logic game question. That part just came really naturally. The logical reasoning was a little bit harder, but not something that was too difficult. But the reading comprehension, I really didn't do particularly well in. None of my training was thinking about themes or motifs or anything like that. And I improved that over the course of studying for the LSAT, but still didn't get a great score on that section.
Gotcha. Nice. So you started at Stanford in 2010. Can you talk about what your experience was like at Stanford Law School?
Yeah, so I joined, I applied in the fall of 2009. So not a great time to be applying to law school. I still think it's maybe the most competitive year on record because of the financial crisis and people, thinking about a career shift, or really, really top folks in undergrad thinking about going to law school or business school or, some other postgraduate degree. But I thought it was amazing. I was choosing between Stanford and some East Coast schools, and going to the it's the on-campus session for a couple of those really solidified that Stanford was a place where I'd really enjoy. Part of it's I'm a Californian. I'm from Los Angeles, went to Cal. But the people I met there and who said that they're going to be going to Stanford, I just really, really clicked with. And I ended up living with a number of them over the course of 3 years. Super friendly student body. For me in particular, as a aspiring IP person, the caliber of the IP faculty at Stanford is really second to none.
Wow.
And yeah, it's just a magical 3 years. And a lot of my best friends, many of whom I'm actively resuming a fantasy football league with, are still from law school.
Nice. What's the punishment for losing the league?
This one, nothing. I have a different league where it's we emblazon you on a trophy. Just kind of like the show of the league. But this one's a little bit more tame.
Love it. And Matt, when you were at Stanford, did you know you wanted to go into big law?
Yeah, I had a pretty strong idea that that's what I wanted to do. Part of that, like I mentioned, I have a family, or my dad and uncle are both lawyers, and I thought that's a pretty good path. Number one, to pay off loans, but number two, to actually get the training to become a lawyer in whatever way I wanted to become a lawyer. I didn't think back then that I would want to be at a law firm forever. I thought it was a possibility, but I thought going to a litigation-oriented firm with a pretty strong IP practice would be the thing I wanted to do.
Awesome. So you spent almost a total of 4 years as an associate between two law firms. What was your experience like as an associate? Did you find it to be as challenging as everyone on the internet and Reddit makes it out to be, or was it something completely different for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. At least my experience, and I had two very different experiences at the firms, both because of the type of firm it was and my level of seniority. I think at my first firm, I was at the kind of flagship office of Gibson Dunn, one of these large multinational firms. A lot of the work was really not particularly hard. It was, a form of document review or doing legal research on pretty discrete issues. So those parts weren't particularly hard. And law school prepares you decently well for them. Document review can be a little bit mindless, although it is quite important. the scale of the case I was on was so massive that I wasn't playing a huge role in it. The part that was difficult was everything else. So learning to do, and for context, I came in knowing I wanted to be a litigator, but actually drafting complaints, drafting answers, drafting motions wasn't too hard because that's similar to what you do in law school. But actually learning on the fly the meat and potatoes of being a litigator, doing it under pretty tight time constraints and working on a number of different cases was definitely a challenge.
Was it a rotational program or were you just in a litigation group?
I did a light rotation. So I probably did 80% litigation work. I did work on a couple of real estate transactions, and I did maybe 10% of my time was doing interesting pro bono cases,
Nice.
like representing folks seeking asylum. I worked
Oh,
on some
wow.
pretty interesting environmental cases. So I think the hard thing for me was really the nuts and bolts litigation stuff where I didn't have the context that I had from law school, and juggling a bunch of different types of cases. And, I was 24, 25, so doing that all as a pretty fresh-faced kid, not easy.
Yeah. And what advice would you have for folks that are just starting out as associates right after graduating law school in big law?
Yeah, this might sound a little dated, but I really believe in it. I think trying to go to the office as much as you can. There is something to the osmosis effect and just hearing people speak like lawyers, learning how they're approaching tricky issues and cases. I think one of the greatest things about being at a law firm is uh, just the connection you get with people who joined the same year you did. And I think it's
The
especially true.
trenches?
Yeah, exactly. You're in the trenches. There's definitely something to the trenches and the trial by fire. But hearing everything that they're up to, asking the quote unquote stupid questions to them, and just getting the trust of people. I think there's no replacement for the amount of trust you can get seeing someone face to face, investing in them, having them invest in you. So that's probably number one.
About partners in the practice group or just your fellow associates or everyone?
Everybody. I think, especially if you're at a firm, and hopefully you have a chance to choose a firm that your personality clicks with. And there are a lot of different personalities in the law, so I recommend like really thinking hard when you're choosing between firms. But both Gibson and then my second firm, Dury Tangri, people were built pretty similarly to me. So very open door policy. People liked when associates took initiative and asked the hard questions and asked a lot of follow-ups. And being
Nice.
able to do that in person, I think is just so much more effective than over email or Slack or video conferencing.
And it was in person back when you were an associate, right?
It was. I was 5 days a week, and well, not always, but it was largely a 5 days in the week office expectation. And I was in LA. I drove from Santa Monica to downtown 5 days a week, and it's hard to believe looking back now that I'm a 2 to 3 day in the office kind of guy.
Nice. So you spent 2 years at Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher, and then you left in 2015 and you clerked for 3 years. Why did you make that transition?
Yeah, I previewed this a little bit, but I didn't think, well, I knew pretty early on that being a law firm partner wasn't something I wanted to do. It was a mix of the hours, the type of work, and most importantly, I learned very early at litigation. This might sound obvious, even to someone who's going to law school, but your whole job is to, kind of destroy the other side, and it's a very zero-sum game. And personality-wise, that just didn't really mesh with my kind of engineering, let's build things together leanings. So about 7, 8 months in, I got a call from a buddy who was a year above me in law school, and he was clerking down in the district court in LA. And he said, "Hey, one of the judges who I know really well, Judge Otero, is looking for a clerk to come on in about a year and a half. Is that something you'd potentially be interested in? He's looking for someone to be his patent clerk because he was part of a patent pilot program down in LA." And I thought about it and I thought, that actually sounds like a really cool opportunity. I heard about it in law school. A lot of my friends ended up clerking straight out, but I really wanted the work experience and didn't want to clerk immediately, kind of extend the school runway. But I thought this would be a good time to reevaluate it, learn what it really means to be a litigator and like what an effective litigator or even lawyer does. So I applied and fortunate enough to get the offer and was there for 2 years. Coolest job I've ever had.
It's awesome. And can you talk about what makes these types of clerkships so competitive? Why are they so highly sought after?
Yeah, I mean, part of it's just the numbers, especially if you're in a large metropolitan area. In LA alone, there's maybe 15 federal district court judges and five or fewer appellate judges. And most of those judges have two law clerks. The appellate judge might have three or four. And you're competing against any other litigator
Everyone.
in the country. Yeah. And kind of the other part of your question is, why is it valuable? You really do learn what matters to a court in a way that you just can't appreciate until you've either been a litigator for a long time and seen what works or doesn't work, um, or you just have connections that might help you understand. Hey, this sort of argument, the judge is just going to reject it offhand. The amount of reps you get is probably the biggest difference between being at a law firm. When you're a law clerk, you might resolve 3 to 4 motions in a span of like 1 to 3 days, where when you're at a law firm, you might be working up a motion in 2 weeks. So
Wow.
just the volume of work you do, the amount of like different judgment calls you need to make, and seeing what really matters to a court and what doesn't matter, and the types of bickering some law firms might choose to file motions about, why a judge is just going to reject that out of hand. So I think you get kind of the 10,000-foot view of litigation in a way you just
Nice.
can't really do at a law firm.
It sounds like you're really happy with how those initial 4 to 5 years went as soon as you graduated because you got super valuable experience.
Yeah, that's totally right. And I've told a number of law students have asked me, like, hey, should I apply? I want a clerk. Should I apply to clerk now? Should I maybe work at a firm for a year or two? I don't think there's a wrong way to do it. I think clerking is really great if you want to litigate. But I was a pretty big advocate of working for a year or two and then clerking, instead of doing it the other way.
Got it. Cool. And then you made the move to DC as a judicial law clerk. Can you speak about how that ended up happening?
Yeah. So I was pretty smitten, like within the first couple of weeks of clerking, and thought, look, I've got 2 years of this thing, but if I can clerk in the Court of Appeals in DC, um, that'd be a really, really cool opportunity to see what clerking is like at a different level. I still hadn't made up my mind about long term what sort of work I wanted to do. So it sounded like a great way to, continue making great friends, great connections, learn to be a much better lawyer, live in a place I hadn't lived before. I'd always thought maybe I'd live in DC or New York, and it was a good opportunity to do that. Um, and yeah, uh, I had applied actually to work with the judge I ended up clerking with when I was in law school, with the understanding that even if I got it, I'd probably work a few years. She said, I like you, but you're very young. Talk to me again if you're still interested in a few years. And I followed her up on that offer. And thankfully, she liked that I had basically done all the things she had asked me to do, which was work at a law firm, work for a district court judge. She herself was a former district court judge before going to the federal circuit. And yeah, made some really, really great friends in DC.
Yeah, that's amazing, Matt. So I want to double click on this because you stayed in touch with that connection over the course of many years, and you tried to sort of tick off those boxes to satisfy what she wanted, and you were able to make that happen for yourself, right? So you kind of sought this position out and made it happen for yourself.
Yeah, I don't, thinking back, I probably wasn't as intentional as
Okay.
maybe I'm making it sound now. But when she told me these are the things she looks for in a law clerk, it definitely solidified in my mind that if a judge is telling me this, I can't be doing a bad thing by doing it.
And was that
Um,
like an email conversation, or how did that go down?
no, that was in person. So I flew out to see her when I was a rising 3L. And she let me basically know, hey, I really like you, but I tend to have clerks who've worked for a few years. I don't think she's ever had a clerk who didn't work for a few years. And she gave me the kind of pitch about what sort of thing might be valuable if I wanted to apply again in a few years.
Yes, that's really impressive. And what did you think of DC compared to LA?
It's great. I've lived in 3 places. I live in SF now, and I like all three of them. But for lawyers, DC is a pretty magical city. I mean, everyone there is either a lawyer or knows an infinite amount of lawyers. It's very walkable, great public transit, increasingly good food, nightlife. And I think especially for a young lawyer, just you're not going to find a city, maybe except New York, that has the density of people in like the same career or type of career that you're in. Um,
Right.
there's cost to that too, right? It is a monoculture, but it's a great way to learn to be a young lawyer. Everyone's very motivated, up to stuff, interested in politics. Um, and all of those things are very, very different than LA. LA's got a lot of other things going for it, but not those.
I love it. And Matt, is there any particular cases that you worked on in the US Courts of Appeals that were super interesting to you that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I can't mention specifically what I worked on, but I can say while I was there, my judge worked on some pretty high profile cases. One of them was there's a major patent litigation, um, it was Oracle v. Google that ended up going to the Supreme Court on a really complicated fair use question. It was ultimately like a multi-billion-dollar verdict, and the Supreme Court ended up reversing, saying that there was fair use in one of these companies using the other's code to write APIs. So that's really cool. Actually, it's a copyright question, but it was a mixed patent copyright case, which is why it was before the court. That was an interesting one. This is during a time when a lot of challenges were being brought to the American Invents Act. This is kind of specific to patent nerds out there, but it was a law passed to basically create this process called inter partes review. And there are a lot of constitutional and statutory challenges to the way the law worked. And my judge is pretty involved in some of those. And looking back now, there's actually a lot of precursors to things that we're seeing the current Supreme Court doing in striking down agency rulings. There's a lot of hostility to Chevron even in those cases, and to the appointments clause. Whether someone's a constitutional superior officer or not. So it was interesting. Didn't expect when I went to this patent court to see, a major copyright case and some major constitutional law cases. But those were pretty darn neat.
That's amazing. It's so awesome to hear like how passionate you are about where you worked and how good the experiences were. And a lot of other folks I talked to, they look back and at the time it seems like they couldn't connect the dots, but looking back on it, they can now. But for you, it seems like, wow, every position I really enjoyed. I learned a lot. Looking back on it, it was a great experience. So that's kind of interesting to hear.
Yeah, totally. I think staying curious is definitely a way to be like a fulfilled lawyer. And I talked to folks at my, some of my parents' friends, and I think, there's a lot of challenges to being a lawyer, but one of the great things is every day is something different. You're always learning something new, figuring out a way to hone your craft. And, the law's ever changing, and we're in a very interesting legal time right now. So if you're someone who's just curious and likes history, I think it's a pretty cool place to call home.
Nice. And this is kind of a tangent, but I do want to ask because I'm curious. Do you think the value of a JD in the US is increasing?
It's a good question. My prediction is it'll probably be harder over time to make the sort of wage that entry-level lawyers are making. And I think that's true across the board. This isn't specific to legal. But the amount that firms are billing or charging clients for various relatively routine legal matters. Like I look back to my time as a well-paid document reviewer at a law firm. I have to imagine that some amount of technology will ease the burden there. I would also hope that law schools could figure out a model that doesn't require people to be in school for 3 years and charge them what they do. Student loan debt is definitely a thing. But I do think the tools you get in law school are really, really valuable tools. Even as an in-house, well, especially as an in-house lawyer, you just bring a perspective that no one else in the business has of, hey, if this thing happens, how are all of these stakeholders around you likely to respond? And a lot of people have that skill set, but you have a particular view of, what is the most negative thing that can happen and what's the spectrum of like possibility that will happen. And as a lawyer, you also get a good sense of, what's the magnitude of that problem and what's the likelihood of that problem. And being able to surface those things to product teams, engineers, marketing teams, PR teams, sales teams, you really can help advise anyone in the business of like, I know what you're trying to do. you've got your KPIs and your goals in mind, but here is why I might suggest a slightly different path to help reduce some of the risk. So I
And
think that's
that's what you're doing as product counsel now, right? That sounds like a good summary of what you're doing. It sounds like you kind of found, I mean, it sounds like you're passionate about IP litigation, but it sounds like you're really passionate about sort of advising on product counsel issues.
yeah. Kind of taking a step back to when I was still in DC and deciding what my next move was. I really thought long and hard about staying in DC and working for the government, particularly in antitrust law, where I'd seen some cases in that space. I worked on some of those at my first law firm. And I kind of got the public service bug when I was out there, like a lot of people in DC do. But I felt more about it, and I actually learned when I was clerking about this newfangled job called product counseling. And the more I learned about it and read up on it and talked to people who were doing product counseling work, I thought this really, for me, is like the perfect marriage of, what I mentioned earlier, my engineering leanings, working with people collaboratively, working on like really contemporary business and legal issues together. And I'm a bit of a risk seeker by nature. So a litigator, you're always like the most risk averse person you can be. Being able to take on and accept some amount of risk, but work with the business to shape it. It's a pretty like interesting way to do creative lawyering, learn everything that the business is up to. So yeah, I find it super rewarding.
Love it. Yeah. And I'm excited to talk about your, going to Twitch, making that transition. So maybe we can just touch on that last stint as an associate at Dury Tangri. So it sounds like you went back in as an associate to do IP litigation once again, right?
Yeah. So I was mentioning the DC possibility. The other possibility was go back out west, go to a firm that might pave a better path to becoming a product attorney or some other form of in-house attorney. And I talked to two different people who were at Dury Tangri, which is it was a prominent boutique firm in San Francisco. And they kind of pitched it to me as, hey, no matter what you want to do, you're going to get a lot more responsibility at a firm of this size. And it turned out to be true. And that included talking to clients, learning what really mattered to them, getting the reps of client management in a way that I thought would be really, really helpful to eventually making the move in-house. So I chose Dury over a couple of other firms. It turned out to be true. I worked on a bunch of patent cases across software and pharma, a lot of really, really crazy cases that I think to this day still aren't resolved. But I got to work on a case with the ACLU. I got to work on a really big copyright case. And the copyright case in particular, I was surprised how much I enjoyed it. And it made me wonder, when I go in-house, is there a way to do some more copyright work? And that's where Twitch came in.
Amazing. And this was, so you transitioned to Twitch. Was this before or after the Amazon acquisition?
It was quite a bit after. I think Amazon acquired Twitch either in 2014 or 2016, and I only joined in 2020.
Got it.
So no fat payday.
Nice. And is it still like a totally separate entity, or were you working? Did it feel like working at Amazon?
It was quite different. I think compared to some of my friends who are at other subsidiaries of Amazon, a lot of them either grew up as subsidiaries or didn't have like as formalized or processes and adopted pretty wholesale a lot of Amazon's processes. I did have a lot of opportunities to interact with colleagues at Amazon. I worked with folks at AWS and Amazon Music and Prime Video on a bunch of different things, but the day-to-day of Twitch was run pretty Twitch-like.
Nice. And that was your first stint as product counsel for just over 2 years, and you got promoted to senior product counsel. So you're at Twitch for almost 4 years. So what was your day-to-day like? Like, how was that transition going from IP litigation to going in-house and doing product counsel at what I assume was a company or a subsidiary that probably functioned like a startup? So I'd love to hear like what that experience was like.
Yeah, it was challenging, but really rewarding in equal parts. The challenge really was how to communicate with business stakeholders in like a much more straightforward bullet point, don't hem and haw and be overly academic sort of way, which I was used to at a law firm. A lot of people say giving advice that is more like business oriented and it doesn't have all of the caveats is challenging. I actually found that pretty fun. I was pretty ready to take my foot off the, bringing a brief from 90 to 100% mold, getting more into like, what does this actually mean for the business? What's the level of risk? What do I recommend you do? So that part was fun. The other difficult part was just substantively. I had never worked on cybersecurity issues. I never worked on data privacy issues. I'd done some consumer protection work, but not a lot of my work was reading and interpreting terms of service and privacy policies and, advising on how to change part of the user experience to
Yeah.
meaningfully capture consent.
So,
That's not that fun.
who were the stakeholders you would mainly work with internally? Was it just product managers or kind of everyone?
I would say half of it was PMs. Maybe 10% was engineers, kind of asking a more discrete question. And then the other part of it was working with other lawyers, finance, marketing, and PR.
Got it. And how big was that team of attorneys at Twitch?
When we started, we were probably 20 attorneys. And by the time I left, well, we had a reduction in force the year before I left, but kind of at its zenith, probably around 45 attorneys. So we had a little more than doubled while I was there.
And what kind of advice would you have for folks? I mean, you obviously got promoted internally. How did you get your brand out there? What kinds of things did you do other than legal work to sort of like set yourself up for that promotion?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the two biggest things you can do in-house are just become known to the business. So taking on projects that are going to get you visibility with executives. For me, it was a little bit lucky because I joined literally 2 weeks either before or after a major amount of copyright issues happened for Twitch. And that had me up in the room with the CEO and other people pretty early.
Wow.
That's uncommon and definitely can't plan for that. But that kind of exemplifies the sorts of people who ultimately like you'll want to persuade, hey, this person's valuable to the company, he's doing good work. And your manager can see like, hey, this person is leading these pretty high level meetings and able to run with it. That's number one. And number two is pushing forward projects that really matter to the business. And I can only really speak on the product counsel side, but a lot of what you do, especially early, is people come to you with a problem, you help them solve it. It's like they send you a PRD, product requirement doc, or a technical spec. You review it, you say, hey, I would tweak these two things, or yeah, I talked to this team. You should confirm with security that that's okay. Those sorts of things aren't the sort of projects that are get you the visibility and import that I think you want. It's more, hey, I recognize there's this really large thing blocking the business or this opportunity that needs a legal person to lead it. So I would keep an eye out for what those are, not lose sight of the obviously day-to-day work that you need to do, but prioritize the things that are actually going to matter to the business. At the end of the day, they're paying you a decent amount of money, and the more you can help them justify that ROI, the better.
Super interesting advice. So it sounds like you're saying being as proactive as possible, not just reactive.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And like I would also say like it's so impressive, to give credit to you that you had just joined and you're in the room with the CEO sorting out sort of these complex issues, and it's because you had all that experience at these firms and clerking that set you up to be in that position, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is a little bit of maybe it's obvious, but lawyers tend to be like a pretty chronically underhired part of any business. So to some degree, if you join a company as a lawyer, there are not many other places they can turn to. It was me and then the deputy GC who had a lot more experience in this world, kind of leading the legal charge on that stuff.
Gotcha. Amazing. Anything else you want to talk about your experience at Twitch?
I think those are the big things. I think it's really, really fun. Like product counseling is this job that can be described in a lot of different ways, but at the end of the day, it's you working with any part of the business that isn't the sales team or maybe some sort of compliance and finance function and helping them get stuff done and helping unblock them when they encounter issues. So it's you see a lot about the business, you learn everything there is to know. I was not a heavy Twitch user, but I used the product and I thought that was really helpful to make me an effective attorney.
What did you watch?
A bunch of like retro RPGs. So, and I grew up playing N64 games, so I'd watch some speed runs of Zelda and Super Mario 64, stuff like that.
Love it. I was watching a lot of old school RuneScape on Twitch. I don't know if you're familiar.
Still big.
Yeah. Did you ever play it?
No, never played. I was never a PC gamer. I always had like Nintendo consoles of some variety.
Nice. Awesome, Matt. Let's talk about your most recent position. You're 7 months in at Databricks. Huge belated congratulations on that. It's definitely one of the hottest companies in the Valley by far. So, if you're able to share, why did you make that transition? How did that happen, and how's it going?
Yeah, it was it's really a combination of two things. The first was I got a chance to work on some AI type projects when I was at Twitch. Can't talk too much about them, but learned about it, learned about some of the challenges, particularly on like the copyright and privacy side, and thought, I mean, it was obvious even when I was learning about it, like ChatGPT had come out, but this is going to be a fertile ground for lawyers for a long time, and it's going to be a big part of the economy for probably the rest of our lives in some form. So I got the bug, and as much as I wish Twitch could have ridden that wave, it's the business model doesn't really align with having a lot of AI support. Unlike maybe a Meta or a YouTube. So I started looking at companies that were more entrenched in the AI world, and Databricks' name kept coming up. And I can't remember if I reached out or the hiring manager reached out to me, but we had a conversation. He told me a lot more about the product and where the future of the company might be going. And I thought this is really, really cool. This is shortly after they had acquired a company called Mosaic that was building tools to help customers build their own LLMs. And I thought, what a cool way to be at the center of all this with helping other companies figure out how to make better use of their data. And not just through AI, but through backwards looking predictive modeling. So that was reason number one. And reason number two is, like a lot of other Silicon Valley companies, 2022 and 23 were really tough years. So Twitch went through a pretty large reduction in force in 2023. And it was just disheartening to see like the morale hit that the company took. Some of my favorite product managers ended up being impacted, and I still think Twitch was one of the coolest places anyone could have possibly worked. But there's a market shift in the how enjoyable it was for me as an attorney to be there. And just so happened that I got the offer with Databricks the day after there was a second pretty significant reduction in force at Twitch. So very, very like weird highs and lows in early 2024.
Wow, what an interesting story. And I got to ask, as a product counsel, like, is this a role that companies are, I guess, dying to find strong candidates for? Is there are companies, is it really highly sought after? Are recruiters blowing up your inbox kind of a thing?
It ebbs and flows. It's interesting because I think it is a pretty in demand job from the company side, but it's also, I can't speak highly. I can't say too many good things about the role. It's super cool. It is one of the few roles that lends itself pretty well to litigators. And there really aren't many in-house litigation roles out there. So I think it's a very attractive thing for a lot of really, really qualified, mid-level senior associate litigators to look at. So I think supply is high-ish, but demand is very, very high for the role. And Databricks is just one example. We probably have a legal team of 60 to 70 attorneys, and we have 4 to 5 product counsel. Like the vast majority of attorneys at a company like Databricks are going to be commercial attorneys.
Got it.
The demand is dwarfed on the demand side is dwarfed by commercial legal.
Got it. And are you managing anyone, Matt?
I'm not. I managed a team at Twitch, and maybe at some point I'll manage folks at Databricks, but for the time being, I'm really on the learning ride. Maybe I'll manage people at some point, but
Nice.
I kind of like being an IC.
Nice. And just because we're on the topic of Databricks, what do you see the legal landscape going in terms of the impact from AI? Do you think the jobs are going to be cut in certain places? A lot of the work will be replaced. I'm curious what your perspective is.
Yeah, I think certain tasks will probably be aided a lot by AI. Like I mentioned, document review is one. I know there's already a good amount of AI tools out there. I have to imagine there's similar, if not more, work being done on the commercial, like contracting side, like workflow management, contract drafting, contract analysis, things like that. Um, so maybe over the long run, it'll change. I think in the short term, it'll probably just mean lawyers will have, there'll be more expected of any individual lawyer to use these tools and leverage them. Um, and maybe it'll result in costs going down to some degree within the law firm. Kind of like I mentioned, that might be a long-term impact on the outside counsel industry. But it could lead to more lawsuits and it could lead to more M&A activity. Like it's really hard to predict in the macro sense what's going to happen. But
Yeah.
definitely the tools are already there. They're going to become more widely adopted. The same way that e-discovery platforms were adopted.
Amazing. Nice. Good to hear your perspective on that. Well, Matt, is there anything else you want to cover on Databricks before I sort of ask you a general question about your overall career?
I think the only thing, and it's less about Databricks and more general advice I give to young and kind of mid-level attorneys is there's no cost to you interviewing at more places and learning how to be a good interviewer. It took me a number of reps to get my first job offer at an in-house company, and I ended up turning that down actually. But it takes a lot of reps. Need to learn your style, and it's a very different type of interviewing to go in-house than it is when you're applying to law firms. A lot more hypotheticals. You'll meet with non-lawyers. They'll ask you sometimes to do take-home assignments and have behavioral type questions. So I encourage people to interview just to kind of stay fresh on it and to learn more about other companies. Just stay curious. It doesn't cost you that much time to apply, or if someone reaches out, take the phone call.
Never hurts, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, you get more reps when you do interview in-house. Cool, Matt. Well, you've had such an impressive career. I mean, it sounds like, all the experiences you've had, you've really valued and learned a lot from. But looking back on your career, is there anything that you might do differently or any advice you might give to your younger self?
Yeah, I probably would have tried to get a product counseling role earlier. I don't know if I would have been as well prepared, but if I'd maybe shaved a year off of clerking or only worked at the second firm for a year or not even worked at the second firm and tried to go to one of the companies that was doing this pre-2020. And I think there was a pretty significant hiring boom for product counsel starting in 2020 because of this law called GDPR in Europe. I think that could have been really, really fun to be on the cutting room floor and learned how these large companies are trying to build up their product legal function. I think that's number one. But no, frankly, I think I've been very lucky. Like obviously I went to a good law school that gave me good opportunities outside of it, both at the firm and clerking level. But I definitely value working at a firm for several years, really valued clerking, even if it's not directly relevant to what I do today. And I can't think of a legal job that I'm better situated for than being a product attorney.
I love it. I love it. Awesome, Matt. Well, I loved hearing about your career today, and I think it was really inspirational. So thanks so much for coming on the Legal Leaders podcast, and really enjoyed the conversation today. So thank you.
No problem. I really appreciated the time, Ollie, and excited to see where you end up after you go to Cal.